Welcome to NBM Talks, a project of the Narrative-Based Medicine Lab. I'm Damien Tonopolsky, the creative lead at the lab, and I'm joined today by Alisha Kaplan. Alisha is a poet, a narrative-based medicine scholar, and teacher. And Alisha, we're delighted to have you with us today. Thanks for joining us.
I'm delighted to be here with you.
I was wondering if you could start off by telling us a little bit about yourself, your background as a poet, and as I mentioned, a scholar and teacher in narrative-based medicine.
Sure. My story is I have always been interested in the arts and creative writing specifically and the sciences. And I didn't think I could bridge those two worlds. In undergrad, I was thinking of going the pre-med route and taking all the psych labs. I wanted to be a psychiatrist. But I also was really interested in English and literature and writing. And I was taking those classes and kind of more drawn to those and to the kind of freedom and creativity and depth that they offered. So I ended up not going the med school route and became a poet. So it was a bit of a veer. And then I went in, worked in publishing for a bit and at a bookstore. And this was all in New York and was living the dream, working at a bookstore and writing. Then I did an MFA in poetry at NYU, which was also very dreamy. I got to study with some incredible poets like Sharon Olds and Yusef Komunyakaa and Edward Hirsch. And after that, I began teaching. And I really enjoyed that, teaching creative writing. But I wanted to do more. I found from my experience teaching and my own experience writing just how healing it can be and how powerful it can be to tell your story and have it be heard and witnessed and to share that with others. It is immensely powerful and quite simple. And I wanted to offer what I, had to offer to other people, and do a little more than simply teaching writing. I had also experienced for myself with my own chronic health issues and experience in the medical system, which wasn't always a positive experience, how much writing helped me through all of that. And so I wanted to offer the tools that I had to other people so that they could express themselves and be heard and feel supported in a kind of creative community. So I began looking into writing that intersected with healthcare. And there wasn't that much happening at the time. I moved back to Toronto and I started to get involved with what was happening here at U of T. And I visited some of your classes.
I remember, yeah, I was remembering
Way
your,
back, I think
your
in
wonderful visits.
2017 was the
Yeah,
first time.
yeah.
And I started to learn more about this little niche field called narrative medicine, which was small but growing and mighty. And there's a building awareness, I think, of the need for it. And then I learned more about the narrative medicine program at the master's program at Columbia. And I thought, wow, this is perfect for me. It's this field that combines everything I'm interested in that I thought were two separate worlds. I could either be a writer or I could work in medicine. I was, at that time also looking into midwifery programs and always in the back of my mind wondering, should I go to medical school? Can I handle it? And then I found this space where I could bring it all together. And it felt like the perfect home for me. So I started out Columbia has an online certificate program. I started there and then I transferred to the master's program. And in the meantime, I was writing the whole time. I published a book and continued with my writing practice, but began working more and more in healthcare from my experience as a creative writing facilitator and a writer myself. And so I did the master's and I moved back to Toronto, and now I've been getting more and more involved with the exciting things happening here at the lab and U of T.
Could you say a little bit more about what you mentioned about writing as a healing practice or a healing process, either either for you as experiencing it, or in your teaching, for witnessing this in workshops and your participants or student writing?
There's so much to say about that. I think, first of all, what it offers is a space in which to slow down and connect with myself and say, oh, like what am I feeling? What am I going through? And to actually process it. And sometimes, I can get stuck up here in that tangle of worry and anxiety, and in a body that isn't always the most comfortable place to be. And somehow having that space in which to reflect and process and create something out of suffering is, I can't say how impactful that has been for me. And so there's that kind of safe haven of in a space in which I can face the challenging things and also recognize and process what I'm going through. And then the second part of that is sharing it with people and having things that are difficult to talk about in the day to day, being able to express it specifically with poetry where I'm not, saying outright, this is what it is, when life isn't always that clear or it's difficult to put things into words. And I see poetry as the closest we can get in language to that which is beyond words. And so it's a space where I can be messy and let things come out in the way and shape and form they need to. So those different dimensions to it have been healing for me.
I think that's going to be fascinating for our participants to think about. I have about 3,000 follow-up questions, but I'll ask two if I can. And you can answer either or both, whatever you prefer. First, I'm wondering if there's certain kinds of writing that lend themselves better to that kind of profound experience that you're talking about. But second, how important is a technical lens? Does it need to be, or do you aim to help people improve as writers, or is it enough to be at the page and be present and be expressing what comes?
I'd say it depends on the audience, on who the people are and what their needs are in that moment. So sometimes people do just need a space to write whatever needs to come out without any judgment, without any critique, and share it and be heard. And that's it. And then there are people who want to craft something. And that's a different approach I would then take in my facilitation. I think there definitely can be benefits to providing people with tools and writing prompts and to push them to, go beyond what they've been doing all along. And it can open up your mind and awareness to different forms of expression. And so that can be really beneficial. There can also be something liberating in offering someone a form to work within, because it can be overwhelming to have a blank piece of paper and say, okay, go write.
Yeah.
It actually helps to have some constriction, to have more of a container to work within, and then that can ease a person into the writing experience and allow them to explore. And actually there can be more creativity in constraint sometimes.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lattice, but there's infinite kind of space within those the grid. I just had a flash to the blank page that's waiting for me at home that I'm gonna have to fill out sometime. You're a longtime friend of the lab. You've spoken repeatedly at our events. You've done lunch hours with us that have been wonderful. You've been a guest speaker in the certificate program, and you're going to be teaching for the lab a fall workshop on, if I get the title right, I believe the title is Nourishing Narratives. Is that correct?
Yes, creative strategies for well-being.
Creative Strategies for Wellbeing. Could you tell us a little bit about what you have planned for that fall offering?
Sure. So I've been really interested in this question of not only what ails us, but what nourishes us. And I think that is essential to, individuals working in healthcare and going through, their own health journeys, but also a much larger question that we need to be asking in our health systems and with the current, many big picture challenges that we face. So, in the workshops, we will be kind of using narrative as a vehicle for exploring self care and care of others. Narrative based medicine offers us a lot of really accessible tools to kind of cultivate wellness and promote well being. So, looking at poetry and art and maybe even having some, mindful eating experiences. These are all, they can all teach us ways to de-stress and unwind and take care of ourselves and one another in a more sustainable way. And then the workshops themselves will be a space in which participants can really have time to unwind and breathe and be revived with creativity and supportive community.
It sounds, well, it's wonderful for us to be offering it, but it also sounds very tempting as an offering, the way you're describing it in terms of that slowing down and reconnecting. I think we could all use a bit of that. And you mentioned there's a mindful eating component, which is something that you've spoken about at the lab previously, and I believe you're continuing to teach in that area more generally at the university as well. Can you tell us about that?
A particular passion of mine is food. I have another life as a farmer. I live on a farm part of the time called Bela Farm, where I grow organic vegetables and flowers and berries. I describe it as a home for creative cultivation. So I've been really passionate about food as medicine. And I recently taught a pilot course I created on this very subject for medical students at Temerty. And I'll be teaching it again. And this is also connected to these workshops on nourishment because on so many levels, food is one of the greatest, if not the greatest lever that we have for improving healthcare and dealing with our chronic health crises. And I believe that narrative medicine also needs to, gives us the space to ask these big questions of healthcare and where the work needs to be done. But food can also be a really powerful, rich metaphor for the sustenance we need as individuals trying to build compassionate care networks and experiencing so much burnout. It can be a really rich vehicle for connection and understanding difference and connecting with our own stories and heritages. So there's so much there that I'm excited about.
Yeah, yeah, it's so deep and rich, as you say, and a reminder as well. I think you mentioned this earlier of we can get a bit stuck in our head and get a bit stuck in our words and in our stories, and it sounds like such a healthy reminder that we're moving around with bodies and we need to look after these bodies and these minds and these souls.
And people
Yeah.
working in healthcare are notoriously terrible at that.
Right.
And the system doesn't support it.
Yeah, looking at the patient's body or the client's body exclusively and neglecting the practitioner's body, right? Wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your own creative work as a poet. You've published more than one book of verse. I imagine you're working on new stuff. Could you tell us a little bit about, well, I guess specifically where your creative interests are these days.
I've only published one book. I'll correct
Oh,
you there, but the next one's in the works, so
yeah.
I'll tell you about that. And I'm working on two main projects at the moment, and they very much have been informed and inspired by my studies in narrative medicine. So the first one is a kind of lyric hybrid manuscript on suicide and the need for more language and understanding around it. I'm weaving together my story and stories of friends of mine with Kurt Cobain's and looking at poetry and art, weaving that all together, and then looking at that within the wider sociological context of the current mental health and suicide crisis that we are in. So it's not the lightest topic, but it's really important to me, and I don't think we have quite enough language around it. And so through writing, I am exploring that and still figuring out what that all means. And then my second project is an erasure of a medical treatise by Dr. George M. Beard from 1880 on neurasthenia, which was this catch-all condition that he really pioneered, mainly diagnosing women with an array of symptoms which would now be diagnosed as depression or anxiety or OCD or even Lyme disease or chronic fatigue or ADHD. And many people were diagnosed with this and given the bed rest cure. The story, The Yellow Wallpaper, is a famous example of that. And what I'm doing in erasure is where you take an existing text and you black out certain parts of it and create a poem from that original text, which is in conversation with the original. And in erasing this text, there is a conversation I'm having with this about the state of the way that healthcare medicine approaches kind of more mysterious, unclear or difficult to diagnose chronic health conditions that impact women a little more than men, and looking back at a kind of evolution of healthcare over the centuries since this text was written. And it's also a kind of personal story. It's centering lived experience, the patient's own experience, their subjective account of their health story, as giving that significant weight, which is a core part of what narrative medicine is trying to teach.
And you shared some of that at one of the lab readings. And I remember it blew my mind. So I'm looking forward to seeing the full version of it. Both those projects sound important. Thanks for telling us about those. I mean, you're operating at a high level as a poet, obviously. But if you can imagine one of our participants starting out, what advice would you offer to somebody looking to emulate your path, your trajectory? What's the top tip or the top three things to keep in mind to begin and to keep going as a writer?
The first and most important is to have self-compassion. There's a lot of judgment that we can experience while writing, which can actually inhibit the writing process. So having that compassion is essential, especially starting out when we can be nervous to do something that we don't necessarily feel comfortable in. And then I would say read. There are so many amazing young poets publishing brilliant works, and then such a long history. And so finding the writing that inspires you, whether it is, not just poetry, but any genre, is to keep reading. That to me is part of writing, and I'll often start my writing practice by reading something. And I think having community is essential. For me, I always need to be sharing my work with people. It's quite a solitary experience, as I'm sure you know, and can be a little isolating if we're just spending time with our own thoughts. And so having people, trusted readers I can share my work with and get feedback. I always need feedback, and then that not only holds me accountable, but it gives me some more fuel to keep going. And then I would also say being very intentional about creating a space in which to write and where you can kind of do that slowing down that is so essential. The writing itself helps with that, but it is, I always am interested in that relationship, that word practice, and the relationship between creative practice and medical practice, and approaching it as something that is sacred. It is maybe even a calling, and giving it the space and attention and intention that it deserves.
You mentioned reading as part of that process. Do you have any reading recommendations or anything that you're reading yourself these days that you'd like to share with us?
Well, I'm always reading about 10 books at a time. But to what I have been really enjoying this week, first, my guilty pleasure, the new Tana French murder mysteries. She's an Irish novelist who writes these wonderful murder mysteries set in Ireland, and it's The Hunter, and it's her new one. I've been enjoying that, as my murder mysteries are my guilty pleasure. I've been revisiting Ross Gay's The Book of Delights. Gay is a poet who wrote, I believe in 2019, a series of short lyric essay recording small joys, delights that he experienced in his everyday that we might overlook in our busy lives. And the act of recording every day these delightful things increased his feeling of joy and delight in the world. And I'm very interested in the way in which, through writing, we can shape our state of being and expand our awareness and change, even our mood and what we perceive through what we choose to give our attention to. And I think that definitely relates to narrative medicine as well. It's something that I incorporate in my teaching. I could say one more.
Yeah, please
if
go
we
ahead.
have time. I'm also revisiting Priya Parker's The Art of Gathering. And she is this expert on how to gather, and from hosting a dinner party to a big conference. And I've been using what she teaches in my own teaching as a creative writing facilitator, narrative medicine educator, because I think there are so many ways to teach and create spaces. So I'm learning from her rules. She's very tough about how to do things. But for instance, how do I create a space in which people can be vulnerable and truthful and have deep conversations? And that requires very intentional setup from the facilitator, and actually being strict about certain things and offering what speaks to that particular audience and understanding what their specific needs are.
Well, it sounds like a great selection. It's a great bouquet. It's a great array, and it's giving us, well, as well as everything you've said today, a wonderful insight into your teaching and into your work. So, thank you very much for joining us today. Thanks, Alisha Kaplan.
Thank you.